This episode begins with rain. I love the sound of the rain falling, and Vintage Story does an excellent job of making the sound of countless drops of water falling from the sky pleasing to the ears. It also means I don't have to water my crops, which will free me up to do more important tasks. Now, last time, I was just a little distracted and... Hold up. Why do my pigs look different? Ah, yes. There was an update recently, and some of the animals got new looks. It also seems the boar is more aggressive now. I should probably leave it alone. It looks like the kid also got a new look. I wonder what else is different now. The berry bushes all look the same. I could have sworn these were supposed to be updated, but maybe that's just the wild ones. Maybe because these ones were picked and replanted, they retained their original look. In the meanwhile, all my clay jugs have finished, and oh, the oil lamps are different. I like it. The wine's not done yet, so I'll just leave these here for now. Alright, back on task. Last time I was continually distracted, so this time I made a list to help stay on track. It has 2 items. First, finish the coal pit, and second, build a smithy. The coal pit should be easy. It's just chopping down a lot of trees and filling up the building I specifically constructed for the purpose of making an absurd amount of coal. If all goes well, it will be a very, very long time before I need to make any more. If it goes poorly, I will have wasted a ton of firewood. To prepare for task 1, I need tools at the ready. Primarily, I need a ton of axes for chopping down the giant redwoods. And, so it doesn't take forever, I need to make sure at least 1 or 2 of them are bronze. I think I'm nearly ready to enter the Iron Age, but that is going to be its own video, after I build the smithy anyway. It would also help if my pockets were a bit larger. Looks like some of my barrels for leather work are getting low on lime water and tannin. I'll have to top those off after I kill this bowtorn and take note of how the berries in my food chest look different. I also have way too many onions for this vessel. I'll need to expand the storage soon. In the meanwhile, the animals need to be fed. I also need to check on the chickens for cockerels. So far, they're all pullets. My new axe is ready to go, and I'm running low on copper. I have enough for a few more tools, but I'll need more soon. My bees seem to be doing well, and none of the saplings have died yet. I think I'll cut a bit of grass while I wait for the bronze to become liquid. Now that I think of it, I should clear this land and flatten it out so I can expand the grove. And I forgot about the bronze. It got cold and needs to be heated again. So much for not getting distracted. I'll just check on the leather before going back to the bronze, which I was supposed to move to the other slot to heat. I guess that coal went to waste. At least I'll have another axe soon. Back at my treehouse, I once again tested if I could put items other than books on the shelves. I could not. Time to prepare for resource gathering. Just a raft ride across the swamp, and it was time to begin. I didn't want to cut down any trees in view of my base, since that would ruin the scenery. So I targeted trees farther back instead. Thanks to the bronze axe, the tree fell relatively quickly. Just one redwood nearly filled my pockets, which was fine since I could unload several stacks into my raft basket. 2 trees was all I could fit in my pockets, but I did still have a little space remaining. So I headed to the peach tree and was once again disappointed that it didn't have any spare branches. I headed home with my haul. The full logs I put in the redwood crate, and the rest I chopped into firewood for the coal pit. Last time, I estimated I would need about 12 redwood trees worth of wood to fill the remaining half of the pit. Sure, I saved some of the wood for building, but I still had a nearly full inventory worth of logs. Those 2 trees didn't even fill a full row within the coal pit. Then again, it was the biggest row. Each one after should fill considerably more quickly. I headed back across the water and chopped down the next tree, which was considerably smaller than expected. To my surprise, the next tree came with honeycomb. I had not realized the redwoods could hold beehives. With pockets full, I had to return to my raft and make room for the remaining logs. I had a few slots remaining, so I looked for the smallest giant redwood I could find. 3 trees this time, and it was time to head home, but not before spotting a wild boar. I was tempted to hunt it, but with my pockets full, I decided it could wait. Besides, I didn't have any spears. Back at the hut, I squeezed the honey into the designated barrel and put the beeswax away. The next day, the sun rose slowly as I continued my task of filling the fire pit with firewood. The woodpile was approaching the hole I had left at the center of the building, specifically for the purpose of putting a fire once it was ready. I was careful to place exactly the right amount of wood before moving on to the rest of the pit. 3 trees worth of wood. At this point, I think the estimate of 12 redwoods may have been a bit high. I also used up all my axes. Thankfully, I had made a second bronze axe earlier. Now, I just needed several more flint axes to finish the task. Back at the Redwood Grove, I picked up more flint for later use before returning to my attempt at deforestation. Although, with the sheer size of the trees, I was hardly making a dent each time I chopped one down. Maybe this was why they rarely dropped seeds. It simply wasn't necessary to maintain the balance. Pockets full, I decided to head back rather than empty the logs into the raft chest. Maybe 2 trees would be enough to fill the pit. Back at the hut, I discovered that the crates maxed out at 320 items. I put the last 3 full logs into the chest and once again turned the rest into firewood. I decided to set up the campfire now, rather than wait until the pit was full. I then made more axes before noting the incoming temporal storm. It wasn't imminent, so I had a little more time before I needed to cower in fear. I decided to weed the garden and examine my seed collection while I waited. I even picked a few for planting based on the current temperatures. It would only get hotter as it neared summer, so I tried to stick with crops that thrived in heat. Soybeans, flax, and cabbage would do. I already had more than enough onions, but decided to plant more of that as well. I also grabbed more amaranth, mainly because I really liked that grain. I have no idea what it tastes like in real life. Of course, this led to me doing research. Vintage Story really does a great job of bringing real-world things into the game. Real amaranth looks just like it does in the game. Pretty flowering top and all. Apparently, it was just as important as corn and beans to the early Aztec Empire, and is pretty high in protein for a grain. Unfortunately, it looks like couscous, which I hate with a passion. It's like eating sand. Although amaranth is supposedly cooked like polenta, which, as someone who is at least partly Italian, I do love. I still had some unused farmland, so I grabbed the carrots and added them to the plot. Next, I fed the chickens, goats, and pigs. Surely the storm would come soon. I checked my tools and storage as I waited, then decided to pass the time grinding tiny animal bones into bone meal. This is one of the ingredients necessary to create better soil for the crops. Another ingredient is compost, made from rot, which I had plenty of thanks to all the berries I couldn't eat. I also realized that soybeans counted as a vegetable, and I could feed them to my animals. By now I was tired of waiting, so I decided to go to sleep and wake when the storm started. This time, a strange shadow kept passing through my cellar. I stepped outside the safety barrier to investigate, and after examining it, realized the shadow was probably one of the giant gears I usually saw in the distance. For some reason, it was existing in a space that overlapped with my cellar. This also answered my question of what would happen if I approached the gears. They seemed to be nothing more than temporal phantoms, illusions which appear as the world struggles to maintain its own existence. Curious, to be sure, but ultimately harmless, unlike that nasty shiver scurrying about nearby. The storm passed, and I attempted to take out the shiver. I couldn't help but notice it was covered in more rust than others of its kind, and then it ate my face. My respawn point has 18 more uses, and rather than go back in the dark, I went to bed. I collected my things and went to feed the animals. To my delight, the pigs had birthed their first litter of piglets. I grabbed some fences and gates so I could attempt to better examine them in a smaller space. I was surprised and delighted to learn that I could tell which piglets were male and which were female from the start. It would make it easier to manage each generation. This particular litter was entirely female, which meant I could retire the mother to get one step closer to the next generation. While I was at it, I also retired all but one of the hens before adding more bones to my collection, and then, unrelated to any recent activity, making some red meat and poultry stew. I don't know if more food makes the baby animals grow faster, but it wouldn't hurt to try, especially with all the vegetables I have sitting around waiting to be eaten. I moved the hides to the next stage of leather making before grinding more tiny skeletons into bone meal. I then collected the stew, started another pot, and topped off a compost barrel with more rot. Since it was getting dark, I decided to start the next pot of stew in the treehouse. I then found a glitch. My shirt had become a black void, and once removed, I could no longer wear it. I was down to my pants and apron, both of which needed repairs. I put the void in the reed chest and headed to the hut. I needed new clothes, which meant I would be using up all the linen I'd been saving for the windmill. It's a good thing I had already planted more flax. Sadly, some of the best outfits require the clothier trait, which meant my options were limited to peasant clothing. At least I could make something blue. All I needed was to gather some nearby woad. I also needed a barrel, because this is vintage story, and you can't simply crush a plant to make dye. You have to soak it in a barrel of water for 8 hours first. I only needed a little blue dye, so I kept the batch small. By now, there was little else I could do for my side quest of making new clothes, so I returned to my main quest of chopping down giant redwoods for my coal pit. I then started a new side quest to hunt a wild boar. I had to make new spears first, and then track down the pig. I then learned the hard way that the aim mechanics were slightly different now. Or maybe it was a skill issue. In any case, my respawn was down to 17 uses. I got my revenge and chopped down 2 more trees. My pockets were far too full, so I leaned the spears against a tree to make room for the remaining logs. Back at the hut, I put the nice logs in a chest and added more bones to the pile. Killed a bowtorn, and swapped the hides around the barrels. I then made more stew before stacking the next set of firewood in the coal pit. It was almost full. Instead of chopping down another tree, I decided to use the overflow redwood logs from the chest. I had a full crate of these things. I don't think I would miss a few extra stacks. By now it was too dark to see, so I went to bed and returned with the light. Several rifts were waiting due to the high rift activity, along with nasty drifters and bowtorn. I had no desire to deal with that mess, so I headed to the cellar and found that my wine was ready. I grabbed the clay jugs and filled them as much as I could. It wasn't nearly enough, but the wine would be good in the barrels for 4.8 years. I had plenty of time to make more jugs. In fact, I could make an entire wine cellar if I wanted. I think I'll add that to the list of future projects. Unfortunately, the creatures from the rift were still at my door, so I had to show them my blade before I could do anything of actual importance. I also needed to make bandages after taking some damage. Finally, I could finish the coal pit. I filled the last few spots, got attacked by a bowtorn who ran like a coward when confronted, and then closed it up while hoping I didn't miss any nooks or crannies. I lit the fire while the cowardly bowtorn continued to shoot, and then closed it all up. There's no sure way to know if the coal pit was working. All I could do was listen for the sound of burning and wait for the smoke to rise. All seemed well, and now only time would tell. I stacked the extra firewood near the clay pavilion before wandering about the orchard. It would be some time before the coal would be done. Perhaps I could spend that time gathering resources. I decided to start by checking the fruit tree locations on my map. Even if I didn't need the saplings, it would be good to have extra. I got one branch from the yellow apple tree, and then got 4 more branches from a different yellow apple tree, which I actually did need to fill out that section of the orchard. I was near starving, so I gobbled down some food before checking on the hides. Several of the barrels were very low. I grabbed some jugs to empty them so I could make fresh batches of lime water and tannin. Grinding the limestone reminded me that I needed a windmill. Although I had originally planned to make the smithy this episode, I realized I needed more materials for the design I had in mind. I also wanted to make the windmill as part of that design, which meant it would be better if all of that was its own episode. So, that is the plan. Next episode will be entirely dedicated to building the smithy and windmill. This episode will end when the coal is done. Until then, I need new clothes to replace the rags currently mimicking clothing. And, of course, it's not as simple as mixing dye and fabric in the crafting grid. I need to put the whole roll of fabric into the barrel and wait another 8 hours. In the meanwhile, the leather is done. It wasn't enough for a backpack, not without using what I was saving for the longbow. The coal pit seemed to have stopped smoking. It was probably done, but I couldn't be sure. If I opened it too soon, all that effort would be wasted, and the wood would burn to ash. To be safe, I decided to wait 1 more day. I would spend that time checking more locations on my map. The second peach tree had no branches to take, but that was fine. There were ruins with lots of goodies waiting in the distance. I stopped by a different set of ruins to break clay vessels and check for bony soil, both of which I found in plenty. Still, if I included what I had at the base, I was close to a stack of bony soil by now, all of which was potential treasure to be uncovered. I found another set of ruins, which gave me nothing but hunger. Finally, I found the good ruins again, broke a vessel of cassiterite, and then climbed down into the room below. I finally grabbed that torch holder I wanted, along with a planter and a ceramic vessel. There wasn't much else of value, so I picked up the tools I had left behind and headed home. I stopped at another ruin, only to be sneak attacked by a bowthorn. I couldn't see the creature, so I was forced to flee. Back at my base, I unloaded my pockets. Perhaps I didn't have quite a full stack of bony soil, but it was more than half a stack. I decided to put the torch holder in the cellar. I took down the oil lamps and wondered if the cellar would be too dark without them. Then again, mobs were spawning down there anyway. I then grabbed a pot of food from the shelf before fighting with the morning drifters. I had to retreat to heal once, but came back swinging. More bones for the bone pile, and then I removed the rot from my milk bucket by throwing it in water. I then fought a shiver, as this morning seems especially full of horrid monsters. Thankfully, I still have bandages, although at this point I was down to my last one. I chased a bow torn onto the roof, where it fell to my blade. I grabbed turnips, grain, and soybeans to feed the animals. I think the pigs will need an extra trough soon. But it's time this episode came to an end, which means checking the coal pit. To my delight, it worked. I started digging. The coal was packed so high it fell if I dug too much. But I wanted to get a better look, so I kept digging until I could stand at the center and look around. This was an absolute enormous amount of coal, and it would last a good long time. In fact, I planned to simply walk over and dig some out any time I needed it, rather than store it all in a chest. Next time, I will gather resources and build a smith and windmill. Thank you for watching, everyone, and remember, take care of yourself.